Okay. Okay, well, welcome to our presentation. This is really exciting. I'm Deborah Giles, and I am the research director at the Center for Whale Research. And I am being joined by Elizabeth Seeley from Conservation Canines, University of Washington Center for Conservation Biology's Conservation Canines, as well as the Whale Museum Soundwatch Boater Education Program. We're really excited to be able to present this research. We've been both working on this for this project for a number of years, using scat detection dogs to collect fecal from the endangered southern resident killer whale population. The PI on this project is Dr. Samuel Wasser, and he's had two grad students work on this project with him, Dr. Catherine Ayers, and now brand new Dr. Jessica Lundeen. So this here picture is a killer whale breaching. We took this picture from the boat about maybe 5 years ago or so. Nice, fat, healthy-looking whale. And so the object of this project is just to collect as much fecal from this endangered population as possible. So the population that we study are called the southern resident killer whale population. It's a group of animals that was listed as an endangered population in 2005. There are three groups that make up this population: J-pod, K-pod, and L-pod. There are currently 85 individual animals in the population. And sadly, this population of animals was pretty heavily targeted early on from, sorry, I'm a little distracted. Hopefully the sound is working okay. A participant is saying that they can't hear anything. Maybe Deb, can you check that? So as I was saying, this population was heavily targeted for removal for the captive industry. That ended in '76, but quite a number of animals had been taken out of the population. After that, there was a period of increase in the population where the population reached 96 individual animals. Might have been a little higher than that even. But then there was this pretty serious decline that was unexplained, couldn't be explained by the removals from a couple of decades prior. And so the federal government set out to find out what was wrong with this population and what was causing the population not to increase. And after several years of inquiry and research coming in, three main, I guess, causes were identified. There were other causes as well, but the three main ones were reduced quantities of prey and reduced quality of prey as well. So smaller, less fatty fish and fewer of them. Toxins in the environment, human-caused toxins, DDT, which was used in agriculture, mostly in California and south of Washington State, where the whales spend most of their time in the summer, but still persistent throughout the whale's range. So that's DDT. PCBs were more of an industrial chemical that used in heavy machinery, and lastly PBDEs, which are your flame retardants, that became very, very prevalent in the environment, still heavily used for not only putting out fires, so being dumped out of airplanes and helicopters right onto fires, but also directly into textiles. So any kind of fabric in your home ended up being, this is changing thankfully, but there was a long period of time where all textiles such as couches, carpets, drapes were treated with PBDEs to keep them from catching fire in your home. And so all of these are very persistent chemicals in the environment even after they're stopped being used. They're called legacy toxins, and that's the case with DDT, which hasn't been used in this country for 30 years, but it's still pretty prevalent in the environment, and we'll get to how the whales end up ingesting that in a bit. And lastly, vessel presence and the associated noise. So there's a lot of shipping container traffic that goes through the Southern Residence Core Summer Range, as well as private boaters. There's a pretty healthy whale watching community that is both out of Canada and from the U.S. And commercial fishing, private fishing, just really vessels on the water and the noise that's associated with it. So those are the three main causes of decline as presented by the federal government when they listed the whales in November of 2005. Federal regulations went into effect May of 2011 that help anybody that's boating around the whales understand where to be and how to operate. So the federal regulations basically in the U.S. waters set up distance guidelines saying that vessels aren't to approach killer whales, any kind of killer whale, within 200 yards, and also to not position vessels within the path within 400 yards. So both in front, as the graph here shows, but also to the behind the whales as well. So those have done some good work, I think, in giving the whales a little bit more space. And so I think we'll go to the next slide. Oh, let me just tell you real quick, this photo down here is a really fun one. Liz, can you see my pointer moving around on this slide?
No, I can't.
Okay, well, so this group here is a group of killer whales. This is J2, also known as Granny, and behind her, this large male is J1. He's deceased now. He was probably in his 60s when he died. And then this is the J14s, which are the family group that's most closely related to J2. The verdict is out right now as far as J2 or Granny's age, but she's at least in her mid-80s and possibly as old as over 100, 105. So quite old. Amazing animal, still very active, loves to breach, and just a really nice little family group there. And then you see in the background how close that is. That's a Washington State ferry. Okay. So why scat? Why did Dr. Sam Wasser start looking at scat to tell information about endangered species? The short answer, and what we end up saying, is that there's a mother lode of information that you can get out of scat. You can tell the species of animal, which when you're collecting terrestrial animals, it can be a little bit harder to tell. Was this, a wolf or, well, experts can tell, but a wolf or, say, a coyote or something. Lab analysis can say exactly what species that is. Also, if there happens to be a nice register of DNA for a population, scat can actually be analyzed to find out exactly who that one individual is. Reproductive status. So this is a really interesting and exciting development we'll talk about a little bit more in the findings, but scat can be analyzed to find out whether or not females are cycling, so whether or not they can get pregnant or if they are pregnant. Stress hormones from any number of things, human-caused noise or just presence of humans, say building activities, oil exploration, things like that, where animals are closely affiliated with activity. We can look at their scat through time and see whether or not, say, human activity or presence changes the stress hormone levels. Nutrition status is just exactly what it sounds like. So are the animals getting enough to eat? And then also some physiological and disease states of different animals. So fecal can be looked at to tease out some disease that might be causing an animal or a population of animals problems. So another way of saying that, essentially looking at the scat allows Sam and his team, Dr. Wasser and his team, to address all of the identified threats to the whales as far as the vessel presence and noise, nutrition, whether or not they're getting enough to eat, and toxins in the environment.
All right. So then the main question is, how do we actually find the scat once we've decided to go look for it? And the Center for Conservation Biology uses this awesome program called Conservation Canines and their scat detection dogs. And Conservation Canines finds these scat detection dogs through animal shelters. And most of our dogs are actually rescue dogs. So they're either from an animal shelter itself or they're from an owner who has decided they can no longer care for the dog for whatever reason, mostly because of their personality traits. And they would prefer not to give them directly to a shelter. So Conservation Canines takes these dogs and we give them this second chance. We look for working dog breeds such as cattle dogs or Labradors or Border Collies. We've had a couple German Shepherd mixes or pit mixes, and we're looking for the dogs that are really, really motivated, have tons of energy, and are very, 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 very toy driven. And what we like to say is if you throw a ball, the dog's eyes watch the ball the entire time it's in the air until it lands, and then every time the ball bounces, the dog's head bounces up and down with it because they really want to focus in on that toy. I have a couple examples down here on this slide. This is Tucker. We'll have a lot more slides on him, but he is the main whale dog for Conservation Canines. He started with the program in 2006, and his main studies are the whale project with the Southern residents or Alberta in the oil. Then we have Jack here in the middle. He's a cattle dog mix, and his main projects so far have been on wind farms and working with bats. We've been looking for their people out in the woods. And then over here, Sadie Mae, she on the bottom left of your screen, she is one of the best cat detection dogs we've ever had, simply because her ball drive is out of control, is the easiest way of saying it. She is by far one of our most obsessed toy-driven dogs, and she would sit at every single scat she possibly could just to get to play. And the reason we do look for these toy-driven, high-energy dogs is because they love to play. So every time they find a fecal in the field for us or a scat in the field for us, we train them to sit and give them their toy. So they end up working all day long just to play with their toy. The next question people normally ask us is, where are conservation canines, and then how do you train them? So the long and the short answer is we have a training facility in Eatonville, Washington State. It's at Pack Forest, which is a sub facility of the University of Washington, and we house up to 32 dogs. We have over 4,000 acres of amazing forest that we can train the dogs. And we travel all over the U.S. and the world. For instance, we have a team here in Northeast Washington right now actually looking for a wolf scat. We have 3 teams out there hiking around in the winter trying to find wolf. We've done a lot of international studies to Cambodia, for instance, to look for tiger and leopard with the World Wildlife Fund. We've been to Mexico to look for jaguars, South Africa to look for cheetahs and lions, fecal, and then Tucker right here on the whale study. He and I actually went down to St. Lucia and we did a study looking for iguanas. So our conservation canines have been trained on a variety of species, and it all works because they love their ball. So anything you guys can think of, we can train the dogs on simply because they have this incredible joy for playing with their toy. So how do you actually train a scat detection dog to find whale scat or any kind of scat? It's not an easy process. It takes a while. The main things we start with is called a box training or box exercises. And this has been modified a little bit over the years, but the basic principle is still the same. We have a system set up down here, if everybody can see this okay. And you pretty much line up a whole row of empty jars. And one of those actually has a fecal in it, our target species. You take the dog around in a circle, run them through this line of jars, and as soon as they put their nose to this jar right here, you give them a command. And usually our command is sit. It's our indicator. So the dog sits, they get their toy instantly, and the ball kind of passes their eyes right as they put their nose on the scent. And that's how they make the recognition. Oh, every time I smell this, I get to play with my ball. And they get really excited about it, and after a while, they learn to sit on their own every time they smell that. So once we get them to that stage, you make it a little harder, and we move them out here down to the next one, which is a sit exercise outside. And it's almost exactly the same principle, except for we put them outside, we move them further apart, and you introduce a whole bunch of other elements into the exercise when you do that. Like dogs have to deal with a different temperature, you have to deal with a different kind of texture around the fecal. Like you have dirt now, you have grass, or you have a rock, or you're next to a stump, or wherever you decide to sit up your sit exercise, it changes a couple elements for the dogs. Wind also plays a really big role in this. The sit exercise also gives the chance for the handler to learn more about how the dog behaves around a sample or a scat. And the dog will change their behavior as they get closer to it. So those are those characteristics or those behavior changes are what eventually led the team to work really well together when they're out in the woods or out on the field. Down here you have Jennifer Hartman. She's one of our senior dog handlers, and we have CK9 Max. And he's showing his nose right on the sample, and Jen's about to tell him to sit, and then she'll pop him the ball. So the dog, again, once they're outside, gets that immediate reward for nose on scat or sample. They get the ball. And it's just a repetitive training method that ends up working really, really well for both the handler and the dog. Again, once you've mastered that, you have to move on to the next exercise, which is what we call field exercise, but it's when everything becomes more random. Like the handler doesn't really know where the samples or scats are placed. The dogs don't know, and that's when the teamwork really takes place. The handler starts to look for the way the dog moves across the land, or you look and see if the dog is running in circles, or if they run side to side, or how they hold their tail. Is it up or is it down? Do they wag it a lot or do they sit still? How does their face look when they get close to a sample? The handler starts to look at all of these different aspects of how the dog is working, and then brings in to the equation all the other elements that we haven't really had to think about, like the wind. If it's blowing really hard, like where do you take your dog through to find the scats? Is the wind blowing it really hard across the field, so you want to run your dog through it straight across, or do you want to do a couple loops? What kind of habitat are you searching in? Are you looking in woods? Are you going to climb a couple logs? Are you looking for prairie samples because you have a deer you're looking for? It becomes a really complicated scenario that the handlers have to navigate. And it ends up working really well, but it's not an easy process. Training does actually take a couple months. When you get down to a field exercise on the water, everything honestly kind of goes out the window. And you end up starting over from scratch, and you're like, okay, so now I'm on a boat. The dog can't actually run to the sample like he would on land. I have to be, as a handler, you have to be able to communicate with the boat driver. You want to go left or right, and how far to the left or right. The dog has to realize the sample's not something it can go to. So it's looking at you like, holy cow, how am I going to get you to that sample? And then you have to get the dog to recognize the sample's always moving, because the water never stands still like it would on land. You have a sample that can get caught in a current and shoot 2 miles away from you, or you have a back eddy that it'll get caught in, or you have a drift line or a debris line and it gets caught up in logs and eelgrass or garbage or whatever else you have on the water, and everything is very, very complicated. But the main thing you have to focus on is that each sample that we have sets off a scent cone. And we'll get to that in a little bit here, but the main thing is that the dogs can pick up the scent. They have different signs on land that get translated to the boat, but on a smaller scale. So on land, when, for instance, Sadie, up here in my field exercise photo, she runs really big circles, her tail wags all the time, her ears are perked up, and she is excited to be working. On a boat, she hunkers down on the front of the bow, her ears are still perked up, her nose moves a little side to side, she moves her head to the left and the right, and then her tail's still always wagging. So there's little things you pick up on that translate over to the boat that help you find that sample. No matter how much training you've done on land, the water training actually still takes a couple weeks. Just to train them here using a bowl and the sample on the water. Once you use the live animals or you move on to the whale, that takes at least another week or 2 weeks, depending on how many whales and how much they're leaving behind for us. Does that make sense to everyone? We can answer questions later too, I guess. Right.
Okay, so after the dogs are trained and we're ready to start collecting samples, we don't just go out there and collect the fecal. That's a lot of work for sure, but it's also important to collect a lot of other information that can be tied in with the fecal, the actual sample, but also some information that might be able to be utilized for other studies. So we have developed and continue to take information on the, our research vessel is named Moja, which was the name of Sam Wasser's first scat detection dog. Moja means one in Swahili. So he named his research boat Moja, which is kind of fun. So we on Moja have developed a series of data sheets that Liz has now made into a way to take that data in a electronic form, which has made it a lot more time efficient and more fun to take the data. So when we're out there, every half an hour, we collect information on the number of vessels that are present, the time of day, where we're located. So the GPS unit that Liz has programmed automatically locks in the date, time, and latitude, longitude. We record information about the weather. So is it raining or sunny? What's the general scene like? Are we the only boat out there, or does there happen to be a fishing derby going on, for example? And then, as I said, the number of boats and also the type of boats and what they're doing. Then also every half an hour we take whale behavior data. So who is the group that we're following? Well, more than that, we kind of do an overall assessment of what's happening with the whales. How many, do we have J and K pod, or do we have all three pods there? A basic information about the potential number of animals we might have. And then more specifically, we take information on the group that we might be following. So are they doing any sort of surface active behaviors? Here you see on the screen it says SAB, that stands for surface active behavior. Speed, direction, cohesion, so how close are the whales together? How are they oriented with one another? Are they kind of head to tail, nose to tail, or are they flanked, peck to peck? And what's their basic overall behavior state? So are they traveling or foraging, resting, or socializing? We also try and get photo identification of the group that we're with. That helps just with the overall basic information that we're collecting for that potential sample. It's really great when we have the Center for Whale Research staff on the water. They would be on another boat, and it's really fantastic to be able to call them and say, hey, who do we have in this group? We've done that throughout the years, and also sometimes whale watching boats will let us know, especially if we're quite far back from the whales. Liz is going to give you the setup for how we generally start motoring behind whales, but just quickly, we're oftentimes 400 or 500 meters behind the whales, so we only see. I like to joke when people say, "Oh, do you know who you were with?" And I say that we're really good at looking at the trailing edge of dorsal fins as opposed to the side angle saddle patch shot that a lot of other people see from the side. We're usually quite far behind the whales. which is fantastic because that means that we're collecting this information, the scat, non-invasively. So who is the individual, if we know, or the group? And then once we collect a sample, we take information on the actual sample itself. So, you know, date and time and location, again, is recorded pretty quickly. And then how far away were we from the whales? I think Liz is going to, now I'm thinking we might not have that graph in there, but the vast majority of our samples are collected beyond 400 meters, so 400 meters or greater distance. And then we take information on the actual scat sample. So what, how big is it? What color is it? What's the consistency? We're going to show you some pictures of different pictures of different scat to give you an idea of the wide variety of different samples that we might collect. And then the program that Liz has worked up for us automatically records our track. So where our boat is going through space and time. And those track logs can be analyzed later to try and determine things like, are there feeding hotspots, or are there corridors where the whales just generally travel, things like that. So a lot of information is collected every half an hour for every day that we're out there. And ultimately, that's going to be, again, used by this study and also available if for comparison over time. So what do we have next? Okay, Liz.
All right. So the main components when we're out in there is what are the different methods we have for actually finding the scat? Like, how are we successful when we're out on the water? We go out when the whales are present, rain or shine, which can be a little bit of a challenge on an open vessel, and a little bit of a challenge when the water gets rocky. And our typical day is 4 to 6 hours. If we're having a really awesome scat day where we our record is 10, so like if we had 10 scats again, we're usually out for 8 to 10 hours, which is a really long day and everybody's tired and we try to take the next day. If we're just getting completely skunked out there, everything is sinking instead of floating for us, or the water's not working right, or the wind is too strong, then we actually quit early and we only stay out for a couple hours. The main survey methods that we have while we're out on the water is these three right here. They're called a follow, a sneak, and a lateral. So a follow is when the wind and the whales are going opposite directions. So this here is Moja, my nice little whale photo here. We're all traveling, well, Moja's traveling this way. The whales would be traveling backwards. You flip them around on your screen. And then the wind is coming straight across, so it makes it really easy for us. We can stay our minimum of 200. We can stay our minimum of 200. Our maximum is over a mile away from the killer whales, and the wind kind of just pushes their scat straight towards Moja, which is the ideal situation for everybody. A sneak is really a lot harder. It's when Moja is traveling this way across your screen, the whales are going in the same direction across your screen, and the wind is blowing the same way from the whales to Moja. So what it means is that this little present that they left behind right here for us is going to be a lot closer to the whales, and it's a lot harder for us to keep in mind we haven't included current into the little scenarios right here because it throws a monkey wrench into everything and makes it more complicated. But when they're right here, what we do is we try to sneak in right behind the killer whales right at that 200 mark, and hopefully what happens is we've given Tucker and the wind enough time to create what we call that scent cone. The lateral down here is when everything is in parallel, so the wind is coming up and the whales are coming up, and it actually works beautifully because we're just here and everything kind of just blows in our direction, so it doesn't end up being too hard for us to actually find the sample in that scenario. This is a slide that we set up to really explain it to you guys because the scenarios have so many different components, it makes it really complicated for someone to understand. So the first thing is we're on a scent. That means we are set up on our survey method, and we're hoping, fingers crossed, that something is left for us. Here come our whales. They're going to be traveling from left to right. The wind is going to be blowing from the killer whales down to Moja. So that's our best scenario possible. This is even better. I did include current on this one. It's pushing it from the whales down to our boat. So we don't even have to go too far. The water's going to bring whatever, yay, a poop, to Moja. So they've left us this awesome pancake-sized fecal sample, and then that's going to travel down on the water towards us. What does that fecal sample provide? This is that scent cone that we've mentioned a couple times. Right here through the middle of the cone is where it smells absolute strongest, where the dogs are going to pick it up the best. Out here on the edges, they pick it up just enough for the handler to see what we were calling those changes of behavior. So for Tucker, he'll like turn his head a little bit, or he twitches his, I can't even do it, he twitches his left nostril a little bit, and then perks his ears, and then leans slightly over to the left of the boat. And that's when we start communicating silently, because we don't want to impede on Tucker. We don't want to distract him or anything. And I start using my finger movement. So, child, 2 inches to the left, and you'll hear her rings clinking on the steering wheel, and she'll move it, 6 inches left, or however she moves it when I quirk my finger. Or if I give her a big hand swipe, I can hear the steering wheel going a couple times to the left. And what that's doing is it's taking us out of the scent cone here directly into it. And Tucker moves us to the left and the right using those same methods I just described until we end up perfectly in the middle of the scent cone. And then he is right over the bow of the boat. He is right in the middle on the front. And he just hangs out there. His tail starts wagging. He starts leaning really far forward. I'm holding him with all my strength. And then we get to this beautiful pancake-sized sample. Well, then what? Yay, we found a sample. What happens then? This is what happens next. Give me 1 minute here. So that is...
That never gets old.
It never gets old, no. So that is Tucker's reward every time he finds a sample. That's what he does. And if you're wondering why his toy is attached to a rope, it's because his favorite game has been to throw the ball up in the air. 9 times out of 10 it lands in the water, not back on the boat. And I end up pulling the ball back onto the boat, and then he whips it around all over his face and smashes it against himself, and usually hits me in the process, and then throws it back all over the side of the boat. So he ends up being very entertaining to watch when he gets a sample. And he's well known for it, actually. So now that Tucker's got his ball, how do we get it onto the boat? We use this pole right here. It's actually a wooden dowel, and it's attached to pretty much a pint-sized beaker. So if you think of like a large glass of Coke when you go to a restaurant or something like that, that's about the size that we've clamped onto this beaker. And see if I can get this one to play for you as well. There we go. So it gets scooped out of the water. We pass it on the outside of the boat because we definitely don't want any of that whale scat or whale sample or whale poop on the boat. We have a research technician on the back of the boat, and she pours out as much of the extra water as she can into one of our jugs. We get very excited about whale.
Let's see. How many mils do we have? I'm thinking like 10, 15.
That is a gigantic sample for us. 10 to 15 mils, like this research technician was saying. is a very, very large amount. Normally, if you guys hold up your pinky fingernail, we get something about the size of your pinky fingernail in a 50 milliliter beaker. So a very, very small amount. When we get anything from like 10 to 15 or up to a couple 50 ml beakers, we actually do start dancing. Very exciting thing for us. One of the main reasons you saw the research technician pouring out water at the very end of that video is we're trying not to dilute the sample. We want as much of the seawater out as possible before we use a centrifuge on the boat, and then spin it for 5 minutes, and we really, really get all the extra water that we possibly can out of that sample, and then it gets stored immediately on dry ice. So the best, or the reason we do all of that is actually to preserve the sample as much as possible. All right, so how many samples have we found? Well, since Giles and I started as a team in 2010 with Jessica Lundeen, that was her first year, we have found over 600 samples. 450 have been large enough for some sort of analysis, whether it's DNA, hormone, or toxin. And we've actually gotten 70 unique individuals out of 85 whales. And to put a little caveat in there, when we actually, all the way up until last year, there weren't 85 whales, there were 76 or 77 actually. So we found almost 90% or 95% of the populations. We've actually done a really great job of getting a really thorough analysis from all of the whales. This 187 were large enough for toxin measures from 54 of those whales. And for a toxin component, like in order for Jessica to do all of the tests that she needed to do, we had to get over 30 milliliter samples in those 50 ml tubes. So when I said it had to be the size of your fingernail, that was for like a hormone or a DNA test. Think of it as like this much, which is a lot larger, to be able to do that with toxin measures. Nutrition, what we've been able to figure out is when they first arrive in the San Juan Islands in the spring, so when we first start our studies in May, it's kind of like when the whales first start to show up, that's when they're in their best health. So whatever they've been eating over the wintertime, wherever they've gone, and NOAA's actually helping us fill in those gaps with their satellite tags, that's how we can see how healthy they are, like what they were eating. Right now, we're starting to learn that the Columbia River is a really important river for them. It produces a lot of salmon, and therefore, hopefully, that's what they've been eating in the winter, and that's what brings them into this awesome nutritional health in the summer, well, in the spring. Unfortunately, what we also saw is that thyroid level tends to decrease over the summer as their cortisol level, so it's that stress hormone, as it increases. So the more stressed out the whales are getting, we're seeing a lower thyroid level, and that also correlates to when they have less salmon to eat, which makes sense. So the hungrier you are, the more thyroid hormone, or the less thyroid hormone you're
So also pregnancy hormones, I hinted at this earlier. Pregnancy hormones, there's a paper coming out very soon being able to show which animals are pregnant based on fecal hormones, which is really fantastic. In the past, that kind of information was only able to be collected from captive animals using blood. So it's really great where we can collect fecal and tell whether or not a female is cycling, meaning she could get pregnant, or if she already is pregnant. In 2013 alone, we collected samples, 14 unique samples, and showed that there were a number of females that were pregnant. Sadly, 10 of those were miscarried. We also were able to discern that 10 females had miscarried using 20 different samples. This so-called baby boom that we've been having, that the southern resident population has been having since December 30th of 2014, those females we did get samples on, fecal samples on, and so it's been really exciting to see those females actually give birth and be able to corroborate what we found from the fecal. the newer studies from the drone work looking at females from the air. We hope to partner with those folks to be able to have them, if there's a female that comes in and drone work's being done in May, they might be able to help us target or focus in on particular animals or groups of animals to get behind and hopefully collect fecal from throughout the summer. So the toxins work, Jessica Lundeen, as I said earlier, she just finished her PhD, which is really exciting. Her first paper on the study came out in January of this year, and it's available mostly through universities. So it's persistent organic pollutant determination in killer whale scat samples. And the really fantastic thing that Jessica was able to show was that looking at scat samples, you can actually get comparable measures of toxins that used to be we used to have blubber samples to look at the toxins that were bound up in the killer whales. Now you can, Sam's lab can do that through fecal. DDT, as I mentioned, it hasn't been used widely in this country for 30 years. It was banned, but it's considered a legacy toxin, meaning it's still coming out of the terrestrial environment and into the marine environment, where it's taken up by small organisms, your planktons, phytoplankton, and zooplankton, so microscopic plants and animals, which are then eaten by things higher on the food chain. And these toxins get, it's called bioaccumulation or biomagnification, where higher up the food chain, those toxins don't go anywhere. So it just keeps getting more and more and more, to the point where when you're talking about an apex predator like a killer whale that's either eating fish like the whales that we study, or even worse, the killer whales that eat mammals, they're actually more toxic than the fish-eating killer whales, because they're eating even higher on the food chain, so they're eating mammals. So what the fecal study has shown is that PCBs are highest in J-pod, which are the most resident of the resident pods here in Puget Sound, and that really plays out or illustrates the use of PCBs in industry in the industrial fields in Puget Sound area. PBDEs, the flame retardants, are found in all 3 of the pods, and DDT, most prevalent in L pod and second most prevalent in K pod, which makes sense. DDT was used a lot more in California, and L pod is known to go all the way to Monterey, California, and K pod is now known to go at least to the Point Reyes area in California. These toxins are all lipophilic, which means they're fat-loving toxins, meaning they stay in the blubber until an animal isn't getting enough to eat. And then as the animal is starting to go through stages of reduced caloric intake or starvation, they start metabolizing, any mammal starts metabolizing stored blubber. And the more blubber that gets metabolized, the more fat that gets metabolized, the more those toxins are released into the system. And so there's this potential kind of spiraling effect of the animal feeling worse because there's toxins cycling through the body. They can't maybe forage as well. They're having to forage so much harder and longer to find fewer fish too. So these have potential implications for reproductive and immune systems within immune system failure within these large-bodied animals. So some of the other fun things that can be found in the fecal, we find worms sometimes. Here are some really fascinating worms that we turned over to colleagues at the CDOC Society. Dr. Joe Gatos is a veterinarian. He studies these whales, and we gave those to him as a present. And then there's this crazy looking thing in the middle, which we don't even really know what that is. It was huge. This is just maybe a third of the sample that we collected. And we had a video, but Liz thought that it was probably better for our viewers, especially rather early in the morning, to not show that video. And then this over here is a really nice sample. You can see down here at the bottom, this is where the heavier parts of the fecal are starting to settle down in the tube. And up here are floaters that eventually this water will be poured off and the middle water will be poured off. And then we actually have a centrifuge on the boat where we put these 50 mil tubes into the centrifuge and spin it down, which allows us to pour off even more of that water. As Liz was describing, the more water we can pull off, the cleaner the sample is, or the more pristine the sample is. So this makes us feel really good when we see samples like this, because we know once it's spun down, we'll have at least a good specimen here to work with. So Southern Resident Killer Whale research is continuing. The Northwest Fisheries Science Center, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration science arm here in the region, continues to do research as well. I've been fortunate to be able to work on one of these projects, which uses a suction cup tag that is deployed onto the whale. It stays on the whale anywhere from about an hour to 8+ hours, and then it falls off. We can program it to come off at the end of the evening. And those suction cup tags can collect an amazing amount of information. Studies are just starting to be published on that, so look in the literature for studies on the D tag. And then Dr. Brad Hansen and Candy Emmons from NOAA come out usually once a month per year, and they too collect fecal samples as well as prey samples. So after the whales have foraged and there's fish bits left in the water, Dr. Hansen and his team will go through with these nets and collect that, and those samples get analyzed for, amazingly, the NOAA lab can pull out the DNA of the fish that the whales are eating. So they can extract the fish DNA and tell exactly not just what species of fish the whales are eating, but what rivers those salmon come from, which is pretty phenomenal. Science is just getting better and better all of the time. I mentioned on the first slide that my new job is as research director and programs manager at the Center for Whale Research. My job here is to help continue the 40-year-long study, 40+ year-long study called Orca Survey, where we go out and we identify the new calves and document the deaths of other individuals. And our center, research center, is in the process of applying for a number of grants to do some additional work. And also, just wanting to point out really quickly that most studies affiliated with the Southern Residents take as the basis or the foundational work of Ken Balcom and the Center for Whale Research as kind of the starting point, and then the way to check back in with the individuals that are in the region. And then Liz is going to tell you about her second job. So just to reiterate, Liz and I are both highly committed to this project and hope to continue to work funding dependent, of course. She and I are both hoping to continue this work with Tucker and other dogs that get trained up. And so back over to you, Liz.
So the other project I've been working on up in the San Juan Islands is through the Whale Museum. It's the Soundwatch Boater Education Program. And the main focus up there for that program is recreational boater education. And it's a long-term vessel count and disturbance data set. It started in 1993, so we've been continuing taking the same kind of vessel data that Giles had mentioned earlier on the MOJA data. So we do the vessel counts every half an hour. And opportunistically, we're taking incident data, so how many boats are following the guidelines or the federal laws, how many aren't. And then what our primary focus actually is approaching recreational vessels on the water and handing out the guidelines and the laws to them, talking to them about some of the science that's going on with the killer whales, kind of informing them of why there's a law, why there's a guideline, how they can help. And most people are really, really interested in helping. They had no idea there were laws, and part of the challenge of our program is getting the word out there and actually trying to figure out how to inform people that there is a law and that there's things that they can do before they get on their boat on the water. So if you want to learn more about any of these programs, we did put the websites up on here, and we're available by email or phone or anything else that you guys might have for those programs as well. And last but not least, we just wanted to say thank you. This is a photo of Waylon. He's a conservation canine who was trained on the whale study in 2011. He's one of my favorites. He loved being on the boat. And then one more super adorable photo of Tucker with his goggles on. He only lasted about 5 minutes. I couldn't resist taking photos. So thank you very much from all of us at the Center for Conservation Biology, from Sam, Jessica Lundeen, myself, and Giles. And I guess if there's any last minute questions, Giles and I are available.
I also want to point out this man right here sitting behind me is Dave Elifrit. He's our whale ID guru. He's our photo archivist and the gentleman that usually fields calls about who's there, and yeah, he's very integral to the work here at the Center for Whale Research.
There was a question on here about compliance, and I was just going to talk quickly. Soundwatch produces a paper every season, courtesy of our NOAA contract, and it is online on the Whale Museum site if you guys have a lot of vessel-related questions. That would be the best resource for right now. For compliance on vessels, it is still around 50% awareness and probably around a 50% compliance rate. We do hope every summer that it is.
Another person that we just wanted to give a shout out to is Heath Smith. He's the lead dog trainer and handler at CK9, the kennels. He does a lot of the training himself, and he trains a lot of the trainers and handlers. So he's been really integral for this project. He was the first one to be out here on the scat detection boat with his personal dog Gator. And then he turned it over to Tucker and the rest of the team. So just wanted to give a shout out to Heath too for his great work around the world and also on the Southern residents.
Thanks, Heath. Real quick, there was another question here. Since the whales feeding more spread out, does it make it more difficult for Soundwatch? Absolutely. It makes it more difficult for Moja. It makes it more difficult for Soundwatch, for any researchers out there on the water. It does absolutely make it a lot harder. It makes it further between each of the whales you can sample. It makes your sample, your target sample population a lot smaller, rather than having maybe a group of 20 or 30 whales that we were falling behind. Now we have a group of 4 or 5. And with the fewer fish in the area, the whales themselves then spread out. So you might have 4 or 5 whales in one area, but they're like a mile apart. So even that component itself adds a really stressful or complicated scenario, and the fact that they're only there in the summer months increases the complication for most of us researchers out there on the water. Ooh. Man,
I'll let you take that one.
I would hope not. If there was ever a time researchers or the dogs would be in the water with the whales, I would be terrified. That would just be a really bad scenario all around. You'd get one in a lot of trouble for potential harassment under NOAA laws. Like, even though we have research permits, we're not protected that much. As a handler, I would have done a really poor job handling my dog if they ended up in the water while the whales were around. But as a funny side story, after the whales had gone very far away, I think they were, I don't know, we were easily a half an hour behind where the whales had been. We were collecting a scat out of the water, and we actually had even finished processing. Like, there were interns were in the back. They were all in a flurry of activity, and I dropped a beaker in the water, I think it was, or a pole, And Giles is laughing because now she knows. And she had motored me up to it, and I was trying really hard to lean all the way over the boat as far as I possibly could to pick it up because I didn't want to leave anything in the water, and I teetered incorrectly, and I ended up doing a dive into the water. Thankfully, I came up with all of the trash I was trying to collect. However, it was very cold and not something I would ever recommend to someone, but memorable.
We're lucky that Tucker was never at all interested in water. So even to the point where if it rained, Liz would either have to put a raincoat on him or stand kind of above him and block him from the rain because he would get mopey and sad if he got too wet from rain, or splashing if the water was such that the boat was kind of slapping and we were getting spray over the side of the boat. Tucker gets a little grumpy about that. So we're lucky in that he's not the typical lab that wants to get into water. He wants to stay as far away from it as possible.
The other dogs that we've trained, Max, Waylon, Pepsi, and Sadie, they all they all handle the water a lot better than Tucker actually does. So it's been a little bit more enjoyable on my end as a handler on the boat when they're out there. Because then we all get wet and they don't mind. They wag the tail and shake it off. They don't care. But Giles is right. Tucker is more of a prima donna when it comes to getting wet.
I'm just going to flip back to this last slide in case you want our contact information one more time, and then I think our contact information is on the overall advertisement for Oceans. The last thing we wanted to do is just thank all of the people that put this on, the kids that started this program. You guys have been amazing, inspirational to us to know what you guys went through to pull this off. Thank you for doing it, and thank you for inviting us. We've been really excited and looking forward to participating in your program. So good job, and keep up your good work. Any last minute questions?
Absolutely. This has been a blast. Thank you for having us. Real quick, any issues with predators in the field? As far as I know, none of us have really had to, well, we've all had encounters with predators in the field, but we've never had an encounter that's been really harmful to us or the dogs. We always carry the proper safety gear out in the field. We all have a pet first aid training. We all have our whooper trainings. We're all very well certified to be out there in the woods, hiking around in scary situations. But most of the time, animals stay out of the way, and we rarely see anything we're actually looking for. The poop we're actually looking for. It's the beauty of the dog, or that non-invasive. When we retire the dogs, where did they live? Usually with retired handlers as well, or handlers that have moved on that had the opportunity to work with those dogs. Those are our first choices. Many of us handlers have multiple dogs that we have currently working with, are currently taking care of, or will take care of. Personal dogs while you're a handler can't happen. You don't have enough time with your personal dog. You are spending your entire life with this program. One of the things as a conservation canine handler that we often try to really promote to people is that it's a complete lifestyle. You dedicate 24/7 to this this program. You're living at the kennels, or you're training at the kennels, you're working with the dog, you're taking them on breaks, you're taking them on jogs, you're making sure their hair is groomed or their nails are trimmed, and then you're training them on exercises, and then you head out into the field, and our field studies range from 4 weeks to just under 6 months on the wild study. So it's nearly impossible to have a person at the same time.
I think we're out of time.
I think so. Thank you again, everyone.
Thank you. Bye, Liz. Mm-hmm.